Hello, friends, and welcome back to Creeps and Creeps, yet another true crime and paranormal podcast / YouTube channel. My name is Cece Delaney, and today we're going to be talking about this awful case that I had heard about a few years ago about Allyzibeth LaMont. This case is fairly near and dear to my heart because I was able to talk to her sister Brooke, who was really sweet, really kind, and also has a really kick-ass bakery, so go check her out. I'll link her info in the description. But when I reached out to her, I was really more curious about learning about Allie, who was a real person with real things and real accomplishments and real passions and dreams and aspirations. She's just forgotten, and I don't think that's fair. So I really wanted to reach out to her sister Brooke and find out who Allie was as a person. That way I can intersperse that throughout all of the horrific things that were done with her. Hopefully add a little light to the mix. But you guys will see, Allie was such an incredible person, and I'm just really grateful that Brooke took the time to talk to me. So in 2 seconds, we're going to get into that. But first, hi. If you're new here, welcome. If you're coming back, hello again. Welcome back. Missed you. Great. Okay, so let's get into things. Allyzibeth Ally LaMont was born December 4th, 1996, with her 2 older sisters and 1 younger sister, Brooke. Allie was a native to Gloversville, New York, and was known to be friendly and generous, and actually we're going to hop into our first Brooke-based interaction. Brooke talked about how basically Allie was the light of any room. She remembers making paper snowflakes with her and listening to Christmas music, singing Frosty the Snowman and Jingle Bell Rock together. Brooke says that Allie was a free spirit and just went with the flow of things and did what she wanted, but really just wanted to have a good time, kind of as we all do. Allie was in the process of getting her life together at the time of her murder and had actually just gotten out of an abusive relationship that involved domestic violence that she'd been in for about 4 years, which we're going to touch on just a little bit later. But the point is that Allie was just starting to flourish as a person before her life was cut short. She kept a small group of friends, but mostly hung out with her family, just very family oriented, very kind, very empathetic, and just seemed like a genuinely kind soul. She had steadily been dating a new guy for a few months after having broken up with her ex, who she had previously shared an apartment with for 4 years, and she started living with her friend Jenny and Jenny's super young daughter at the time of her disappearance. Things seemed to be working out for a little while, but it's a small apartment with a toddler. Things are gonna get kind of crowded. And Allie had started to get to the point where she was ready to get out on her own. She was saving up for her own apartment, and she was ready for her independence back. She was working at a place called Local 9 Deli in Johnstown, New York, in order to save up money and get her own place. She had only been working for the owner and her husband, George, for a few months, and things were already looking really shady wherever Giorgio, or George as he's more commonly referred to in the press, was involved. He was kind of a shady little shit. George is a 52-year-old Greek immigrant who had lived in America since his early 20s. He had already tried to venture out into multiple failed businesses in the past, including the Saratoga Diner in Saratoga Springs and Travers Diner in Gloversville. At the time of the murder, he'd made his wife the owner for Local 9, which I assume was for shady and nefarious reasons, but it's unconfirmed, so please don't take that at face value. I'm just speculating here. On October 28th, 2019, Allie was scheduled to work alongside her manager's girlfriend. She had texted her roommate while she was at work to ask if Jenny could bring her a phone charger, which she did, and was completely unaware of the fact that this would be the last time she ever saw Allie alive. Later that evening, Jenny texted Allie, who was in the process of getting her driving permit, to see if Allie needed a ride home from work, but she never received a response. But at the time, it didn't really raise any alarm bells because Allie's at work, maybe she's busy. But by the time the next morning rolled around and Allie wasn't home, by the morning of October 29th, the local police had received 2 slightly alarming calls concerning Allie's whereabouts. The first was Allie's older sister, who had called to see if Allie had called or if they had any weird phone calls about Allie, but unfortunately they didn't. However, law enforcement said that they would look more into this. And then about an hour later, police received another call about Allie, and this time it was Jenny who reached out and decided that it was time to file a missing persons report and met with an officer named Chad Simonson. Jenny told Chad that earlier that morning she had gone to the deli to see if George had seen Ally, and he said no, and that Ally wasn't scheduled to work that day, so he likely wouldn't. Jenny also filled the police in on Ally's new guy and her ex, who, again, it was an abusive relationship, so she might have been thinking that he had something to do with something, but it turns out neither of the guys were. Like, we're not gonna sit here and play speculative games. They weren't involved. Their names are cleared. It was not them. So we're just gonna ski on past the new and old boyfriend. And then on October 30th, the police went to the local 9 deli to speak with the manager, James Duffy, who had worked for George for about a year. And James is just an interesting character on his own. He was a career criminal and admitted user of crack and heroin who had 6 children with 3 different women. In 2002, he had gotten himself a conviction for raping a 14-year-old girl at a football game, and he had also violated an order of protection to stay away from his children. He had been busted for drug possession, and he got in trouble for inciting a riot while he was in prison. Not to mention that he was actively struggling with addiction during the time of the disappearance and murder. So anyway, when the police got to the local 9, they noticed that there was a sign that said that the building was under renovation, but it was still open, so they were kind of like, okay, that's suspicious, but whatever. And so they go in, they go to the back, and they see James's girlfriend and another random employee in the back, and the police just began to casually question them. James's girlfriend had said that the deli was closed on the night of Ally's disappearance, but really couldn't offer up more information than that. But she said that James was scheduled to work the next morning, October 31st at 10 if they wanted to follow up, and also gave them George's and James's phone number. Shocker, neither of the men answered. As we'll find out, they were a little preoccupied during this time. At this point, the New York State Police were called in just to try and help out with the investigation. They were finally able to get in contact with George, who was like, oh yeah, Ally and I are so close. Her full name is definitely Allison, not Elizabeth. Also, she's like my daughter. Also, I gave her $500 to go toward her new apartment. Love her. Like, he was really out here pretending to be so close with Ally. He didn't even know her fucking name. He called her Allison, which is not the same thing as Elizabeth. He said that after he gave her the $500 to borrow, he wrote out a note that was kind of like a contract, essentially, saying that, yeah, Ally will pay me back, blah, blah, blah. It's fine. I'm gonna get my $500 back. And he made a point to mention this. And he said that she took the money and basically peaced out and left work early for the day. George really did not have a problem allowing the detectives to search the restaurant, and they immediately clocked how dirty the restaurant was. But don't worry, our boy George also has an explanation for that. According to George, they had had a recent incident that involved the soda machines basically exploding all over the place and getting syrup everywhere. So they were like, good enough time as any to go ahead and renovate the whole restaurant, I guess. And it seemed kind of like a valid excuse. Like, realistically, that's kind of a good excuse. But also, fuck you, George, you evil little monster. It was around this time that both James and George were finally taken in for questioning. Unfortunately, James was all sorts of messed up on alcohol and possibly drugs, and at that point, detectives felt like it was a good idea to just send James home to sober up. But George was completely sober and ready to talk.
She was helping with the syrup situation. She complained she didn't want to do it.
So she took the $500 that night, and then what?
What time she left? I would gotta say anywhere between 7 to 8. She said, "Thank you, George."
She said thank you?
Yes.
Okay.
She said, "Thank you, George." I said, "Just be good." I yelled, "Just be good." And then she left.
He said that he had this paternal bond with Ally, even though, again, he called her Allison and not Elizabeth, and that he knew of her domestic abuse and felt like she was just a lost soul whom he could save.
But she was trouble girl. Rough. It was rough. I tried to help her. I tried to be a father to her a few times. Her boyfriend was beating her up. I felt bad for her. I treated her literally as a daughter of mine.
He also said that Ally confided in him that she wanted to commit suicide, which, as far as I know, was bullshit and unsubstantiated.
Then one day she says to me, "I don't want to be here. I had enough of this." I said, You mean you don't want to work anymore?" "I have enough of my life," she said.
They asked George if it was possible that James had done anything to hurt Ally, and George immediately rebuffed, saying that he didn't think that James, quote, had the balls to do something like this, unquote.
The one thing we never talked to you about is, do you think Jim had anything to do with this between us?
I really don't think so. He doesn't have the balls to do something like this.
Like anything that harmed to her or do anything to her or anything like that?
They were friends. They were buddies.
And like, I'm sorry, this is not a game of truth or dare where you've been dared to streak through Times Square at the busiest time possible. This is murder.
Is Jimmy a good worker?
He's heavy, yes. He has a bad side. He has a bad side.
Are you sticking up for Jimmy?
I don't give a
Why are you sticking up for Jimmy?
Are you in what sense you mean?
Like, maybe he had something to do with it and you just don't want to come forward?
What's the conversation you had with Jimmy that day?
I want to remember it first, because if it revolves around women, I don't want to play it.
Women?
So, I don't care.
You think we care?
I don't care.
I know, but
I don't really care.
I do.
So you're not letting us listen, that's what I'm taking it right now.
I prefer not.
So anyway, they asked if he had been in contact with James or Ally since she disappeared, and George said that he would let the officers look through his phone at first. But then he got really shifty really quickly and seemed concerned about what they might find, as he should have been, because he basically would have incriminated himself off the bat.
So keep going down, Then there's a couple calls with James right there. This one's 36 minutes long. 36 minutes. You're the one with the information right now that can help us solve this.
I'm not denying you the information. What I'm denying you is a lot of private, personal information.
Now, the next day, on October 31st, James had finally sobered up, and the police made an unannounced visit to his house. And fortunately, James was very willing to go to the police station and be questioned and interrogated.
I want you to find her, okay? Trust me, I do. Because I want my friend back, okay? Not only was she my friend, she was a hellfire worker that I can never replace.
If something happened to this girl, you gotta tell us. Are you this guy that was around for an accident? And like, you feel awful about it, but you're about to tell us? Or are you this guy that...
No, bro, listen. No, you keep... Yo, listen, I told you. She was fine when I seen her last. I tell you this much, I don't know where she is. You know what I mean?
There's one part in particular that to me is just so creepy, and it's when he just laughs and he's like, you guys don't even know.
You don't even know. You really don't.
He sounds like a movie villain. He's the worst. So why did this ever happen? We're going to backtrack here for just a hot second and go back to September 10th, 2019. An investigator from the Department of Labor had made an unannounced visit to the deli when Ally and another coworker were just working. They were both unaware that the representatives were there for the massive amounts of debt that George had hanging over his head, and they listened as Ally told them that none of the employees were being paid what they were owed. Apparently, George had been underreporting his employees' hours and refused to pay them on time, and when he did finally pay them, it was in cash and off the books. So being the good person that she was, Ally was having none of this shit, and she began a bit of a campaign to oust him. She had made plans not only to report him to the labor board, but she also planned on putting his greedy ass on blast all over social media for his corruption and confront the owner, George's wife, to see if she could help out in any way. I don't know if she knew what a shithead George was and was just genuinely in the dark. I don't know. So I don't really know how that would have gone for Ally, but the point is, she decided to stand up for herself and her coworkers, and she got murdered because of it. It also turned out that Ally's complaints about her boss came at the same time when George, who owed anywhere between $200,000 and $700,000 in debt to the state and IRS, the number was weirdly muddled. I really couldn't tell you, but on the high end, it was $700,000. On the low end, it was $200,000. Apparently, it's up for debate. Anyway, because of this debt, George was ready to just up and move his business to Saratoga Springs. I guess, I don't know, to start over? Like, the IRS is nationwide, but alright. At the time, he was also facing a bankruptcy petition and did not keep proper records, which would be a big problem for him when the Department of Labor started sending him letters asking to see his payroll records. At this point, shit's getting real serious for George, and he directs his rage toward Ally. He was furious at her and started to think that she was a traitor for being honest, God forbid. I personally speculate that that's why the local 9 was in his wife's name. That way they could continue to try and get away with this fraudulent behavior. But again, I don't know. That's just speculation, but it just seems weird to suddenly put the business in your wife's name. Anywho, now we're all caught up and back to the current timeline where James has just confessed to the murder and took detectives on his tour of New York to gather the evidence and locate Ally's body, obviously thankfully arrested. Now that the cat was out of the bag, it was pivotal to figure out what happened on the night of the murder. According to James, the plan was hatched on the 25th of October when George brought up wanting James's help to kill Ally, specifically telling James that they had to tie up loose ends, quote unquote. At first, James was like, no thank you, but eventually he gave in and was bribed by a couple of hundos.
They gave me $500 to do all these drugs, so that way I could build up the courage to do this. Bought me a case of beer.
Then on October 29th, 2019, when the shop closed after 7 p.m., Georgios asked Ally to do the dishes in the back. James waited until Ally wasn't paying attention and then struck her from behind in an ambush with an aluminum baseball bat.
Smack her on the head with a bat. He had a bag, started choking her. He then said she's not going down, she's not dying. She started kicking and all, this, that, and the third. He said to go get him the little sledgehammer. Gave him the little sledgehammer and
Whoever with the sledgehammer.
one each from both of us. We continued to choke her for a while. She kept twitching.
Now that the adrenaline is pumping and things are moving really quick, George tells James to go to Walmart and buy cleaning supplies and make it snappy, otherwise George would quote-unquote kill another. For some reason, even though James is out in the great wide world, cell phone in hand, in a fucking car, he doesn't tell anybody. I don't know if it's because he was high and freaking out or because he just participated in murdering someone, but he didn't call the cops and shift blame onto George. He didn't call his girlfriend. He didn't even try to run away. He just went to Walmart, got his crap, and then came back. James said that once he came back from Walmart, he cut the hoses on the Deli syrup machine to, quote, cause more of a mess, unquote, and give him and George an excuse to clean the business up the next day without looking super suspicious. Apparently, this was a quote-unquote evolving plan because neither of these dipshits had any idea what they were doing. The night that they murdered Ally, they threw her body in the car and drove around looking for a place to dump her body because they hadn't really thought that far ahead. So anyway, now that they have her in the back of the car on the night of the murder, they're scrambling. They're trying to dispose of the body and the evidence. And George had actually made his own Walmart trip, and he had came equipped with shovels and concrete and fertilizer and a drag bag in order to put Ally's body on the bag and make it easier to drag her body to their dumping spot. These two idiots drove around until midnight and ended up at exit 13 on the I-87 on-ramp and popped the hood in order to make passerbys think that they were simply having car troubles. And then these two demons dumped her body only 3 feet into the woods and came back the next evening after dark and buried her in a shallow grave under fertilizer and cement and some sticks and continued just getting rid of or moving evidence until sometime that Wednesday on October 30th, at which point the cops just so happened to meet up with them in the back doing some quote-unquote renovations. Like, they just got done burying a human after taking her life from her, and here come the cops sniffing around. I hope that they were panicking and felt like shit during that moment. Sorry. Fortunately, within a few days, both of them were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Fortunately for the LaMont family, the case was fairly cut and dry. George did kick and scream and make life a little difficult because he was shifting his counsel around, but eventually they got the show on the road and got into court. Like I said, because things were fairly cut and dry, there really isn't anything to talk about from the court proceedings other than just a few key points that I specifically want to mention. First was when the New York State Department of Labor Commissioner named Roberta Reardon wrote a letter letter to the judge that in part said, quote, Allyzibeth came forward in good faith to report labor law violations to the Department of Labor to fight for justice for herself and her colleagues, and became the victim of the most heinous act of retaliation against a worker that the New York State Department of Labor has ever seen. I ask the court to consider the potential chilling effect in terms of sentencing that this murderer's actions will have on workers who seek to exercise a basic and fundamental right, the right to report mistreatment and violations of the law. Workers in New York State must be able to report labor law violations without fear of retaliation. Allyzibeth is a hero to the workers she fought to protect, and while nothing can bring her back, you can honor her legacy by making sure she did not die in vain. Unquote. Ooh, that got me weirdly emotional. Okay then. Probably just because it's so fucked up, dude. She was just trying to do what was right and was living up to her reputation of being the biggest sweetheart, and she was killed over it. So in May 2021, 2 years after the murder, George was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for count 1 first-degree murder. Georgios is serving his sentence at Great Meadow Correctional Facility in Comstock, New York. James Duffy over here pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 18 years to life. He also testified against Georgios, and his cooperation meant a conviction on a lesser charge. I'm going to wrap everything up by reading a part of Brooke Lamont's victim impact statement that said, quote, "You have no regard for human life. You disgust me. You make me physically sick. Now everybody knows who you truly are. A woman-hating masochist piece of shit who lies to get his own way. You deserve the absolute worst. She wasn't a nobody like you thought. I hope her memory haunts you. I hope your guilt eats you alive."
The day that you took my sister's life, you took a part of mine. Ellie was the light of the room, the contagious smile, the laugh you could never forget. She would help anybody unless you gave her a reason not to. She was strong, caring, loving, and hardworking, and you took that all away.
And honestly, everybody snaps for Brooke. Go buy her baked goods to support her. Show that you have snaps for her. Anyway, if you guys are interested in more of the family-based cases, let me know. Suggest it in the comments or DM me at Creeps and Creeps Podcast on Instagram. If you just so happen to be streaming this as a podcast, please consider throwing a rating my way, with 5 stars being the most helpful, and subscribing to the show wherever you're listening. I also have a blog post dedicated to each episode on creepsandcreeps.com that I'll link my sources in, and you can watch the episode from there or stream the episode from the blog post as well. So until next time, keep those little noggins on a swivel, and please try to stay safe out there. Bye!